Still moving twice. That's what I did when I bought my house and moved to Rapid City. Is the house I bought, they moved into twice. So I put all my stuff in my folder. And then I had to move again. Stay with my daughter. So.
Who are you? Let me finish this. Hold on just a minute.
Good evening and welcome to the Monday, August 28th, 2023 special city council meeting. Now is time for a roll call and determination of quorum.
Bieberdorf. Maher. Roberts.
Here.
Stroman.
Here.
Pettigrew. Sechrist. Lehman. Ham. Evans. Roseland. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Now is time for the Pledge of Allegiance. Now is time for the adoption of the agenda.
Move to adopt.
Have a motion by Councilman Stroman, a second by, I think it was Councilman Roseland. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Now it's time for general public comment. Our speakers have 3 minutes per speaker. This is a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the council on any issue not on the agenda. No items will be added to the agenda per state statute for special meetings. And I have one general public comment speaker, Mr. Brandon Ferguson.
Good evening.
If you'd please give us your name and
You bet.
just for the record.
So my name is Brandon Ferguson. I am a federally enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux Tribe. I live here in Rapid City, and I am the executive director for Ending the Silence here in Rapid. Right now in our community, 4 out of 5 of our Native kids are sexually abused before they turn 12. We've had over half of our teens attempt or complete suicide or contemplate it this last year. Our community has had a couple suicides here within the last couple weeks. On Tuesdays, our organization, we feed our homeless down at the skate park along Rapid Creek. We know our relatives by name, and we know their stories that put them there. Nearly every single one of them are victims of child sexual assault, and they have managed to keep that secret intact their entire lives. And the alcohol and drugs is what they use to cope, to hide this. I have a solution to resolving our Native American homelessness problem here that exists in Rapid City. It's not a unique solution, and it's not reinventing the wheel by any means. The solution is simple. It's called cooperation. First, we acknowledge the problem, and then we work together to solve it. This is what working together looks like for me in our program. That we will go and we will meet with tribal chairmen from across South Dakota and the surrounding states. And we will address them and get them on board with our issues, because it is their tribal members that are living here in Rapid City today, and we're going to empower them so that way they acknowledge the problem and that they understand that the tribes have to play a vital role in solving this homelessness problem in Rapid City. Homelessness in Rapid City is nearly 100% Native American. This is a Native American issue. This child sexual assault issue, it's not a white man raping our kids. This is a Native raping a Native. This is an internal problem that we have to take ownership of as Native Americans. So I'm going to meet with the tribal chairman, and I'm going to have them be a part of the solution by declaring a state of emergency. A state of emergency simply means that they're asking help from the federal government's Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Health Services, because it's beyond the capability of the tribe to solve on their own based on the lack of funding, resources, and their jurisdiction. This is nothing new to tribal government. State of emergencies are impactful, and they're simple. They're simple solutions. We see them in the newspapers all the time. Oglala Sioux Tribe declares states of emergencies on everything. It's the standard protocol to get help. 2, the city must support and encourage the communications with the tribes by creating a letter of commitment that I will go around and I will share with the tribal leaders, which I will attach to these state of emergencies, outlining this crisis that we have at hand.
Brandon.
Because the problem is out of hand.
Brendan,
Yes, 30 seconds.
even though this is very interesting, no, I gave you a little extra time. Why don't you put together a presentation and work with maybe the mayor, come before a council meeting some night with a presentation? That way we can give you a lot more time on this.
Right.
But here at the budget meeting, this probably isn't the best time for this.
Okay, I think this would probably be the best time for it, if you don't mind, President Roberts.
I do mind,
This
because
is-
if I give you more time, I have to give everybody more time. So I'm sorry, but you're done.
Considering that I'm the only one on public comment, I'm asking for leniency and that the council would allow me 2 more minutes to finish.
2 more minutes, I'll give you 2 more minutes.
Thank you, sir. So flying to Washington, D.C. to meet with the heads of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Services, along with our state delegates, so I could find a viable solution to create a roadmap that will reach the outcome of securing support in the way of funding, resources, and overcoming these jurisdiction boundaries. No one else can do this but a Native American. That's the problem. This has to be an issue brought forth by a Native, because it's a Native issue. Otherwise, we're going to continually be stuck in this cycle. At this time, I'm requesting funding so I can make this vision a reality. I need assistance with traveling expenses so we could get this done, and our lodging and our meals. We have the capability of doing something very historical here. But I do appreciate your time tonight, and I promise you we will address this homelessness issue, and I will have it taken care of, because in 90 days from now, we're going to be hearing about another one of my tribal members freezing to death.
Thank you. And that is the end of general public comment. We will move on to non-public hearing items, items 1 through 4. I will open public comment on items 1 through 4. And I have a speaker request by Annie. I can't read your last name, I'm sorry. Bashan?
There you go. You did good.
I said it right because Lance told me how to say it.
Good evening, City Council. So today I stand before you to shed a light on an often underestimated pillar of society, the arts. In a world where economic growth and technological advancement often dominate our conversations, we mustn't overlook the vital role that investing in the arts plays in shaping vibrant, thriving communities. Just as we strive for safer neighborhoods, we must also recognize that true prosperity encompasses cultural richness, creativity, and artistic expression. When we contemplate safer communities, we must immediately think of reducing violence and addressing crisis situations. It's crucial to acknowledge That safety isn't only about physical protection, it's about fostering an environment where individuals can flourish creatively and intellectually. By embracing the arts and culture, we not only enrich our souls, but also enhance our social fabric, making our communities more cohesive and supportive. Many of you know me well and know that ever since I've come back home, I have invested my time and energy and resources into our community. And I am so disappointed with this budget. 4 park rangers, I don't get it. I don't get it at all. Because 4 park rangers is not about enriching our community. It's not about building and flourishing a life-giving society. Last year, the public safety budget was about 51.9% of the budget, and the arts budget was 1%. And now we're looking at forgetting about early childhood education, all these other things. I don't get it. I am boggled by this. Because I know so many of you up there on the city council, and I thought I knew you, Mayor. And I really believed you when you said that you believed in building a society where we start getting along with each other. And public rangers, park rangers, that's not it. Let's think about what kind of a city that we want. Let's envision that for our kids. Let's be visionary in that pursuit. That's what we have hired you to do, is to be visionaries, to think outside of the box, not to go back, not to live in fear, in trepidation. The problem isn't drugs and alcohol. The problem is unresolved trauma and grief. We have known that. And we're not investing in that. We're not investing in culturally responsive mechanisms to help with that. A few dollars to the CARE campus, a couple extra dollars to the mission, and a few $1,000s to Journey On. Take that money that you're going to do for park rangers, invested in Journey On. That makes a little bit more sense. That's an engagement with members of the community, helping members of the community. Let's be visionaries in our community. Thank you. I will respect the red light.
Thank you. We have one more speaker request form from Autumn Gregory.
Good evening and thank you. My name is Autumn Gregory. I am the Director of Early Childhood Connections, or ECC, as some of you may recognize. ECC is the label on the line item in last year's budget that received $50,000 from the city. The funds that ECC uses and receives are used to support a program called Starting Strong Rapid City. For just a second, I'd like to kind of give you a brief history of Starting Strong. In 2008, a survey was conducted by South Dakota Voices for Children, indicating a lack of quality early care and education as a concern in Rapid City. As a result of this survey, a task force was formed representing a cross-section of Rapid City: law enforcement, educators, city government, economic development, child care, parents, and social service organizations. This task force created Starting Strong to provide quality learning and an environment for Rapid City's working poor or families at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. The majority of children in these families are already in child care programs, but their families cannot afford preschool opportunities. Starting Strong provides preschool scholarships to families to give their children the opportunity to attend high-quality preschool programs. Starting Strong also supports existing preschool programs in implementing quality, developmentally appropriate early learning programming, strengthens programs by supporting and stabilizing their workforce, and providing technical assistance and professional development. Starting Strong Rapid City also provides funding to preschools to make curriculum and learning environment purchases, support staff pay, and provide outside professional development opportunities. Starting Strong also supports families by connecting them with existing resources within the community to address needs such as transportation, housing, food, and medical. Research by Nobel Prize-winning economist James Heckman and many others show that every $1 invested in quality early education programs can yield a return between $4 and $16. If funded at the current level of $50,000, that could equal $200,000 to $800,000 in return on investment for Rapid City's future through less early intervention and needs for special education, lower school dropout and higher high school graduation rates, lower unemployment and reliance on public funds assistance, fewer teen parents, decreased juvenile and adult crime, increased economic development, and in community and increased personal income. Investing in Starting Strong is one of the building blocks at the foundation of a strong and vibrant community. I am requesting that this council adds Early Childhood Connections back into the city budget to support early childhood education through the Starting Strong program. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will close public comment, and we'll move on to item 1, which is City Council discussion of the mayor's 2024 budget. This is where you all have the chance to come forward with anything that you may want to add, anything you may want to remove. Let me remind you, if you want to add something in, you probably need to come up with some kind of a funding source or something that you want to cut. I will ask a real quick question, if you don't mind, to the finance director. Mr. Ainsley, what do we have for undesignated cash that we could possibly use if we needed to?
If you want to move on to another point, I'll pull up that spreadsheet. It's
Yes,
taking a second,
absolutely.
sorry.
So if anybody wants to get into the queue, anybody has any questions, anybody has any comments, suggestions? If there isn't any, oh, Councilman Lehman, you have,
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I would like to make a motion to remove the Journey Online item by $60,000 and move that to the VOA line item. If I can get a second and we can take a vote on that move.
you can get a second, but we're gonna have to wait until we get down to the actual ordinance to add it into the ordinance down there.
Okay.
So just write it down. I'm looking for suggestions now. When we get to the ordinance, we can actually make the changes. And if you want to move on to that item and we can do it all just at once, we can do that too. This is just a time for discussion of the mayor's budget. You've got the floor, Mr. Pettigrew.
Thank you, Councilman Roberts. Being new to the council and being printed this 200-page document, I think we just got it a week ago, is overwhelming. And I believe we should have a very thorough discussion tonight. I think many of us have a lot of questions, but I would certainly request that we do not have a first reading tonight. I think many of us have a lot of questions. I'd like to sit down with department heads. I'd like to sit down with other council members and get my questions answered and fully understand this budget. My father told me many times when a businessman serves on a committee, he's no longer a good businessman because he's spending other people's money and not his own. And I take that seriously. When I look at this budget, when I look at the dollars we're spending, it's my money, and I just don't want to rush through passing things and accepting things that I don't understand. So my request would be that we do not vote tonight on a first reading. I know there's some time restrictions involved, but if we're all earnest about this, we'll make time in our personal lives to get together and make this work. Thank you.
Thank you. If that's all the discussion on this item, Mr. Ainsley.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. To go back to your original question that you had to me, the current undesignated cash balance that would be available is just under about 8.5 million. I just want to make sure the council is well aware that a portion of that is already designated to balance this budget at about 5.6. So that brings you down to a little less than 3 million. And on top of that, we do know that there's going to be some additional needs in the near future with the police department, with some remodeling expenses that we are not sure what those total costs are. Those will likely be occurring in 2025. And in addition, there's also a wage study that is going out right now that includes a large number of our employees. And so there's probably going to be a request for a supplemental appropriation that would be early next year that would cover whatever the result of that wage study is.
Thank you very much. Mr. Evans, you have the floor. Push your button again, Bill.
I got nothing. But I'm loud enough so you can hear me.
You're
Mr.
on.
Mr. Ainsley, exactly what are our required by law deadlines to get this budget passed? Because I know we have a local requirement, we have a state requirement, correct? What are those?
Oh, sorry.
No, you just. Thank you, Mr. President. In response to that, by the end of September 30th, we do need to ensure that we have a budget that has been duly passed both readings of the City Council.
Was there another October? I thought there was an October 31st deadline for something as well.
There is, as long as it's not for the property tax portion. The property tax portion is what needs to go, but in general, you are supposed to be done by September 30th.
Okay, so there's like no huge rush to get this done in the next council meeting or so, because we really have 2 council meetings regular in September that we could get anything passed. It needs to be passed, like Mr. Pettigrew says, correct?
I believe that is correct. I think the city attorney wants to chime in though as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other things to consider is, yes, there's on the calendar, it would appear a fair amount of time, but if you make any change at second reading, then you can't complete second reading that night. So when you approve second reading, it basically needs to be done. If there's any changes made, then you have another requirement that has to be noticed. So you have to have 10 days, I think, separation between that change and the next reading. So, the last date theoretically you could make any change would be like September 20th, I would say. Just so keep that in mind. But even then, that would obviously be cutting it close for approving it on September 30th, whatever day that is. So we'd have to work back from whatever the last day you could theoretically approve it is.
Well, we got these line item things that took us by surprise. Where's Annie out there? Yeah, sort of a side swipe. Most of us didn't know any of these cuts were coming, so we really haven't had a chance to figure out where the money went, what it's been spent for now. So, and I do agree with you as a person who spent their life teaching cultural things to children, that if we invest at the beginning, maybe we don't need to spend so much time fixing it later on, because you fix it at the beginning and then the problem may not ever appear. So I think we need, as Mr. Pettigrew says, time to study this, go through and gestate on it, to discuss among each other what our priorities are, where we'd like the money to come from. And since I guess I don't know. It's not like we have to find money from one place, take to another, because a lot of these things were increases over last year's budget. And it isn't like they decided to take from Peter to pay Paul or whatever. So I think the actual total has a little leeway here and there. So I'm going to agree with Mr. Pettigrew. Let's not rush into this. Let's take a couple weeks and talk amongst ourselves, talk to the citizens, find out what our priorities should be, and figure out if this budget actually reflects them. Thank you.
Looks like we have no one else in the queue on this. I just want to make one real quick comment, and I've made this to a couple of council members already, is, in my opinion, we've done this for many, many years. I believe tonight that we should pass first reading, and every change should be done in second reading. So we can push off second reading as long as we want. We could do a second reading and not pass it, and we could go out as far as we want. But what this does is it keeps us from, especially the days that we have to notice it, we don't get on that timeline. This just moves everything up. It actually gives us as much time, or maybe even more time, because we don't have to push in 2 readings real fast. So nothing is determined on this budget until the second reading is passed. So that's just my recommendation. So I will close, since I don't have anybody else, I will close item 1. And I don't think we need to, go ahead. Somebody.
That sounds reasonable. I mean, really, that gives us 3 or 4 weeks of working time before we have to pass the final one. Mr. Pettigrew, you think as well?
I was just going to say, the city has consistently, for procedural reasons, approved first reading to try to help with the timeframes. And it was always understood it's really just getting past the first procedural hurdle. You're not saying this is the budget. There's generally always changes between first reading and second reading. But as Alderman Roberts has stated, most of the changes are made either before or at second reading. And then, so really the second reading generally functions as the first reading, and then may have to have one more meeting after that if you make changes at that meeting. But it just gets us past the first procedural hurdle, so we're under less of a time crunch. And that's something that the city has done for a number of years.
Mr. Ham, you have the floor.
Up to this point.
You didn't come in yet?
We're good. Up to this point, I've only had 3 constituents chime in with their perspective, and I think once we do this first reading and they're aware that this is the opportunity that they have to give their feedback, I think we'll get a little bit more participation from constituents, so I can have a better perspective on how to represent them. So I'm in favor of. So I guess I'll make the motion.
What, we're not to that point yet. When we get to it, I'll let you do that.
Very good. Thank you.
So, if we have no one else in the queue, I will close this. I don't think we don't have to do anything with it, do we, as far as have it? We don't have to vote on item 1. Joel?
No, I don't think you have to vote on item 1. I guess if there were questions to speed up the process, I understand there's still a lot, and there's probably going to be a lot more questions before tonight, but since everyone's here, I would just say if people do have questions for the mayor, it might be helpful to start the discussion at least, even though we understand it's going to probably have additional discussion later on if people do have some questions.
All right, and so, Mr. Mayar, you have the floor again.
Yes, if I may ask the mayor a question.
Yes, absolutely.
So Mayor, I wasn't sure if there's a rationale for taking out the starting strong budget item, or was that a shift over to Journey On?
Actually, to be quite honest with you, the requests were sent prior to me taking office. I did not see that request from them. And I received an email from them letting them know, and it was too late out of my hands, so I recommended they bring it to the council to see if this is something the council wanted to do. I took literally the request that I had and made decisions based on what I received. May have been given to us, I'm not sure, but we had a transition. I've been in office 7 weeks, so a lot of that, some of that might be that. I did tell them I thought they were a worthwhile organization. It was no slight against them. I want to make that very clear. And if it was a budgetary reason, I would let you know that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Stroman.
Thank you, Chair. May I address the mayor also?
Absolutely.
Mayor, on that, just following up on the starting strong, so it was $50,000 in last year's budget, is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
And do you think that there's a place where we could put that back in this budget?
There is, and to Mr. Ainsley's point, and his experienced question, you have to look at a funding source for anything you're going to add or remove. And that's the tough decisions we have to make. And honestly, it was some of the tough decisions I had to make as well. Taking in all of your feedback that you've given me and try to put a budget that I thought would be palatable to you and what the public have told me about. In this case, you have undesignated funds. We have about 2.9 million left. He's telling you, Mr. Ainsley's telling you, that of that 2.9 million that's remaining, we need a good portion of that for unexpected expenses, such as the wage study, such as potential capital projects we didn't anticipate the cost of, or something along that line. So I would be, if you're gonna dip into it, I would make minor adjustments, not in the millions, but if you thought 50 grand could go towards this, you could take it from a designated cash and probably be okay. I would just caution that starts to, my experience putting this, working with Mr. Ainsley to put this budget together is, it adds up very quickly. And so you do want to make sure that you have something there for operating capital, cash on hand to pay the bills month to month, just like your paycheck. You don't want to live paycheck to paycheck. So we certainly don't want to get in that situation. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you, sir. But I just, and I know that it's like drinking out of a fire hose for you when you get this budget. Is there, that 2.9 million doesn't sound to me like a real hefty reserve, I guess. I don't know if I'm comfortable with going at undesignated cash, but I mean, can you think of a place that it might be taken from in another funding source?
I would say that any of your proposed budget cuts that you would make, you should start in the subsidies budget. And I know it's difficult because that's what pays for programs like this and homeless services and the arts. They're in there. But that's up to you. I mean, this, again, it's out of my hands. I placed a priority. I don't, I understand the dollars don't equal the importance of a community. It's just that some aspects can be funded, or some organizations can be funded by outside sources, but there are certain things that only the city can do. And so I did prioritize essential services, to the city. And the other ones are essential to the city, but they're not specifically what the city provide, because there's organizations that provide those, whether that is a crisis services or something along those lines.
Understood. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Ainsley wanted to make a comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just a couple clarifying comments. One, when, as the mayor brought up, there's about $2.9 million left in undesignated that would be available. But again, I would highly caution against using much of any of that, given some of the known expenses that we have coming up. In addition to that, though, I want to make sure everyone is aware that we do have a standing reserve of $11.6 million. That is essentially the GFOA recommended reserve balance. And so not to put everyone at any sort of significant concern that there's not significant, or appropriate cash reserves available. There are. But as far as when you look at actual undesignated cash that's still available, it's about 2.9 million. But again, we do have additional expenses that we are aware of. And so as the mayor said, I would highly caution against use of very much of those funds. However, I do want to point out to the council that there is a line item that's included in this budget that is $150,000 for contingencies. That's including the contingency fund, 150 grand. And again, I'm not recommending by any means designating all of that. That is also meant for situations that might arise throughout the year that right now in August, we're not fully aware of what might happen August next year. But those funds are available. That is larger than what we had in this current year, which is 0, and larger than in 22, which was 100,000. So just to make sure everyone is aware that those funds are available.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Absolutely.
I thank you, Mr. Ainsley, for pointing that out. I did make a couple of adjustments to your city council budget for your consideration. One of them was with equipment for 11,000, but another one was the council contingency funds of 150,000. I did include that so that you could make that decision and have something to draw from as well. So I appreciate Mr. Ainsley bringing that forward. That's something we did in the past. It's gone off and on depending on how we've done each year, but I did included it for your consideration this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg, do you want back in? Absolutely. Right again. There you go.
Thank you, Mayor. That was going to be my question for either Mr. Ainsley or you. With that 150 that he's talking about is what's called the council contingency fund. Then does the council make that decision on how that's spent without consultation with the mayor then? Is that fair?
You have, you will take it, you will bring it up in a meeting and make decisions for the public to understand for transparency purposes. But that is for things that arise during the year that you may not have anticipated or need to address. And so there are many years, Mr. Stroman, that we've not used it or used portion of it. And so sometimes that's why it gets unaddressed. I think as a starting point, I did put it in there just for the sake of discussion, but no, you don't have to go through me. In fact, I have to go through you to spend money. So, anyway, I did that for your benefit, and perhaps, that would be an option for you this evening.
Well, and I appreciate that that's an opportunity that we have as a council to make decisions with that. I mean, obviously, yes, we make the decisions on all of it, but that's kind of set aside for what we see as a particular need that wasn't addressed, and the other needs that the mayor has addressed in his budget. So thank you for that. I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, you have the floor again.
Yeah, I'm just looking back at the history here in 2021. The city budget was 176 million, 22, 204 million, 23, 219 million. Now we have this gigantic jump up to 261 million. So since 2021 until this year, that's like $85, $90 million increase. And I'm a little bit shocked by that and overwhelmed, and I haven't had a chance to go back and look and see where all this money is going to, because I know my own household budget has not increased by that percentage, and so I'm a little bit scared by it, looking at it. So I just wanted to point that out. These have been gigantic increases, and I know money is coming in, but that doesn't mean we have to spend it. So I just wanted to point that out before, we forgot about it.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else that wants to speak? If not, I would like to for 1 second, if that's all right with the people on the council. When you look at this budget on the surface, it is scary. I've been here forever. I can remember when our budgets, I think, were under 100 million when I started, or darn close. So, it is scary, but the thing that you have to look at, especially over the last 2 years, is the cost of goods and services. You got to look that real estate in Rapid City went up 30%. I mean, what has happened has been just insane in the last couple of years, especially cost of goods, labor, things that try to go out and build a new home now. I mean, 3 years ago, it was half what it is now. So it blows my mind. I'm happy that we have the revenue coming in that we can actually pay for a budget like this, because if we didn't, our services would be dropping immensely, because the only other option above that would be laying people off and cutting services. So it is scary, you know, we're in scary times, and I'm hoping that it'll level out next year, the year after that, you know, the year after that, but it isn't really looking like that's gonna happen. It looks like costs are gonna keep going up, and it's just an unfortunate reality today in our society. So anyway, it is scary. And that being said, Lindsay, you can have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to thank the mayor for his budget presentation and Director Ainsley for taking the time to answer our questions. We've been throwing them at him pretty hard. We do have a lot of things to work through, I think, before we're going to feel confident in moving the budget ahead for second reading. I had a couple things. I was just curious, is it common to use undesignated cash to balance the budget? Is that a routine procedure?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, that is. There are different philosophies in different municipalities, so I'm not going to say every municipality in the state does, but that is fairly common. The rationale behind that is when you are projecting your revenue, most of the time it is fairly conservative. As I've expressed in several different emails that I've sent out responding to some of the questions on the council, we usually are not shooting for the best case scenario. Instead, we're saying this is what we would anticipate in an average year, maybe take off a little bit. And so the revenue projections in here largely are fairly conservative. In addition, we are looking at what would the total cost be if everything was spent. In other words, we have a lot of employees that we know will not be working the entire 12-month period. We might have a position that's going to be vacant for 2 months. We're still funding that position entirely, with the exception of the park ranger program that would be starting in May, I believe. Other than that, all the other 980 some odd positions are fully funded. And so we're essentially fully anticipating our expenses and slightly undershooting our anticipated revenue. So I think the main thing you want to look at is ensuring that we are not greatly exceeding our dependence on the undesignated cash, or that there is enough undesignated cash to fully pay for that. And so that's always kind of a question that's discussed by amongst a lot of finance officers throughout the state, everything else. But I would say this is as high as you would want to get with the use of undesignated cash, especially with $500,000 of that undesignated cash being used for architectural services for a capital improvement project for the police. So if you take that out, then truly operational expenses are about 5.1 million of the undesignated cash. Again, that's, to be honest, a couple $100,000 more than what I would fully recommend, but I don't think that's irresponsible.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that insight. I was also curious if we've been provided in any way just a general fund revenue overview of all the sources coming in. We've seen this in years past. There's a Excel matrix that kind of breaks it down where these revenue sources are at, and I think that would help me personally clarify just that 20% budget increase and just where that money is coming in from, and having a little more confidence in then appropriating it.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. That email, and I apologize that I did not send that worksheet out with the expense worksheet, but that was, I think I sent it out on Wednesday or so, but I can definitely resend that out if I inadvertently missed you, and I apologize if I did.
Okay.
But I can send that.
Thank you. I didn't see that come through, but one thing I would consider, I would hope that we can consider more transparency with the questions and answers with amongst the council and with our finance director. I know other communities are really transparent with questions that might be asked, and maybe we put that on the website or have some other sort of open communication. That I feel like a lot of our questions are probably similar in nature, and they might be redundant to send to Daniel, and it just due to open quorum laws and regulations, we're not able to include everybody on those communications. And I do think it would be helpful, and also just keep us all on the same playing field with what information's been provided. That's just my 2 cents, so appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from the dais? If not, I will close item 1. We'll move on to item 2. And this is to approve resolution 2023-076 of intent to take the statutory authorized increase in property tax revenue as part of the annual appropriation ordinance for the 2024 fiscal year. And do we have anyone that wants to ask any questions? If not, I'll look for a motion on this.
I'll move to approve that. I remember we voted on it 2 years ago, and we thought it was reasonable, and I think it is reasonable. It doesn't necessarily mean everybody's taxes are gonna go up. It just means that we're taking money that's available to us and having that to use, so I make that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and if you don't mind, I just want to make a real quick comment on this because as the president, I don't vote, but I want to make it known that if I did vote, I was going to vote no on this just because I have voted no, I think every year and for the last 12 years. But one of the things that I've said over the years is, and especially with a year like this year where we had a lot of TIFs that paid off, so we had a lot of cash that came in from different sources. Bill, you're not completely correct. So this will affect everybody's property tax. It won't affect everybody's property tax very much because the city only takes a small portion of the property tax, and this is only 3% of that portion. But again, you know, if you look at the number, it's 360 some thousand. Is that what it is? 659. Oh, 659. Okay. But you know, it is a source that goes in every year. So if you do lose it, you lose it forever. I know, I understand that. But again, I think that there's ways that we can work on our money to invest it better in the future where maybe we can get rid of this. But I just wanted everybody to know that myself, if I was voting, I'd be voting no. Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor from Councilman Evans, a second from Mr. Stroman, I believe, or Lindsay from Councilwoman Seacrest.
I'd like to make a substitute motion.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I guess the chair's comments caused me some concern because normally I would be in favor of taking this, but because this has been a very unusual year and a period of time with the tax burden that's on our citizens, I'd like to make a substitute motion to postpone a decision on this until the next meeting.
We have a motion to move this to the next meeting and a second motion by Councilman Stroman and I think second by Councilman Roseland. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. We'll move on to item 3. This is
Before we go ahead, Mr. Ainsley, could you explain to all of us how that worked when we voted on this a couple years ago? I know Mayor Allender was very big proponent of that. And it explained how the big overall pot works and how we're taking from that.
Thank you, Mr. President. In regards to that question, this is also a very large philosophical debate across the state. Cities do look at it quite a bit different, and the issue, statutorily, you can only increase the mill rate across, or for your taxing jurisdiction, so the city, by the consumer price index that's released by the state, and that is capped at 3%. So this year, you are able to take up to 3%, even though the CPI has been much higher than that. What the state has done with that is to try to ensure that there is some tax stability within the municipality, so that it's not just increasing at 7-8% in years such as this when inflation has been all over the map and at unprecedented levels. When if a community does not take that 3%, that is a decision that has ramifications for decades to come. And I think that's why Mayor Allender was probably so adamant about it. And I can't say specifically because I wasn't here at the time, but after speaking with him, I think that was his philosophy behind that. Because if you do not take that CPI increase, that does not only affect the 2024 year, it will also affect every year going forward until the state's tax system is revamped. Because that CPI increase goes away, your ability to capture those funds goes away. And so some communities do not take that CPI as a way to ensure that the mill levy for the municipality is decreased. I will say at the previous municipality I was at, we never would do that because it was a stated objective of the council over a 10-year period to reduce the mill levy substantially. And as the president described, in order to do that, the city had to find offsetting revenue to make up the difference. Because again, that's not just a decision that affects 1 year, it's a decision that affects the community forever. So that's $659,000. It's not enough to just find offsets in your current budget to say, okay, we'll reduce subsidies by $659,000. You're effectively making a decision that for the next several decades, you're going to reduce the subsidies by $659,000. Those are highly significant changes that I would just really caution the governing body that you really think about that, not necessarily that you have to take it, but also what are the ramifications long term as a community, because as was stated, everything from our capital improvement projects to our healthcare, to our employees, to our utilities, to our fuel bills have been increasing. And what I was discussing several times with the mayor and we were going over some of these costs, I mean, it's incredible to look at our healthcare fund. The cost for the city as an employer has increased by $1.6 million next year. And that's probably not going to go down in the future. And our fuel bill has increased by, I think it was $450,000. I mean, those are real costs that there's not a lot that we as an organization can do to resolve that. There are some things on the margin which the staff is trying to implement, but those are real additional expenses that we are going to incur for the next several years, that if you make these long-term decisions, that will affect us in 2025 and 2026.
So it's like compound interest on your savings account.
Yes.
You start saving when you're a baby, and it pays off in the future.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Joel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, one thing I'll point out, well, there may be a discussion. We're the only community I'm aware of that has politicized the issue by making the decision separately. You know, I pay property tax. I don't like my taxes going up any more than anyone, although it's probably a little easier because I understand my salary is paid by that. But, you know, the reality is if you're only taking the CPI, if you're limited to the CPI, you know, theoretically you're just keeping it at the same level because you're just increasing it by the cost of the consumer price index. But as Mr. Ainsley pointed out, this year, even if you take the maximum amount, you're still falling behind because the CPI has gone up by more than the 3%. So, you know, everyone wants to protect and look out for the taxpayer, but I would suggest to you the legislature has already done that by limiting you to the 3% max or the CPI. They've protected the taxpayer by saying cities can't just raise it by 7 or 8%. It has to be 3%. So, you know, it does have an impact. I know there were several years in the last decade where we didn't take the CPI, and frankly, a lot of these things that you're trying to struggle how to fund right now, we would be able to fund if we had probably taken the CPI. We would have tens of millions of dollars more over the last 10 years than we ended up getting. So again, you've already been kind of told we already don't have, or we're already spending maybe a little more in the undesignated cash to make your finance officer feel comfortable. Do you really have room to add another $659,000 into the undesignated cash? Because I don't know where else you'd find it. So just some things to think about as you consider whether or not to take the CPI next year.
Mr. Evans, do you want back in?
Well, no, I'm just looking at the chart here, the Excel chart, and where the money's coming from, and I see that people are concerned about property taxes, as everybody should be, but it doesn't look to me like most of our increases come from that. It's coming from growth in other areas, which really isn't affecting them, whether we take this increase or not, because this is such a small sliver of that. And to make a big issue out of this sliver kind of distorts the reality. Most of our increases in this funding is coming from other sources, not that property tax thing. So I just wanted to point that out a little bit. I guess I'm done with that.
Thank you. IT, do they want in here?
I think my light's on.
Oh, is that you? You're IT?
Yeah, I'm IT.
Okay, you're IT.
I can fix your IT problem. I think it's a good discussion. I appreciate Mr. Roberts. You know, I've voted against it in the past, and then I learned as time went on the council about the challenges it presents in the long term. So we know that inflation's high and that we're maxed out at 3%. We all know that the CPI of 3%, that inflation rate's much higher than that. So in order to keep up with just your basic services, I think Mr. Evans said it right. I don't know if his mic was on, but it's a compound interest thing. It goes on and on. So your decision on this does have an impact to the service levels in the future. By the way, you have the luxury of allocating funds tonight because somebody else made that decision prior to you. And so, you know, it's something to think about. We get a very small, the city's portion of property taxes is so small. This is, you know, obviously 660,000 divided by the number of citizens who pay property taxes in the city. I mean, it's minuscule. It is something, I do agree. I think we should fight for these massive increases of property taxes for the citizens, you know, through the legislative process and other things. But this is a funding mechanism from the city. We have very few that we can count on. So when I really learned about the compounding part of that and how over time it does have an impact, it did shift my thinking on that. I talked to Mr. Ainsley about it just to get his perspective, see if I wasn't mistaken in how I understood it. Just as he shared with you, he shared with me about why it was important. And so it was factored into the budget. So you should know if you do make that decision, whether tonight or down the road, you're going to have to remove another $659,000 as part of the process. We have to figure that out as well. Because it is already incorporated in the budget. And so I appreciate where Mr. Roberts is coming from, because no doubt about it, he cares a great deal about the taxpayers, as we all do, but we want to make sure we're stewarding it well. And so something just to keep in mind. And I don't think there's any other city that debates this, and that's fine if we do. I think it's fine because it's okay. I just want to make sure that we all know what we're talking about here. And I'm sure Mr. Ainsley can educate us even further if it's necessary. Thank you.
Any other questions from anybody on the dais?
One more comment.
Sure.
We're sitting here looking at, it's broken down, the property taxes increase from CPI 629 to 659 over a course of a year. Increase from growth, 373 to 637. I mean, almost all the growth is coming, I mean, all the increase is coming from growth. It's not coming from just raising everybody's taxes individually. So, you know, I think it's a reasonable thing to do every year because it doesn't seem to make that much difference.
Thank you very much. And I think that one of the things that was brought up is this is mostly a philosophical question. You know, I'm not saying that this is affecting the taxpayers that much, but I'm looking back 20 years and looking at how much it's affected them since then. Now, if we really want to have a, well, and I'm not going to have that discussion here. We'll have it in some other time. But I think that if we would have been better stewards of our money like we are in this budget now, I think that, you know, there's some things in this budget that I am impressed with. I have never been this impressed with a budget since I've been sitting on the council. And I think a lot of that has to do with our new finance director, who I have a lot of, I think he's doing a fantastic job. I have to give kudos to the mayor. I think that next year's budget will be a lot more streamlined when, you know, I'm hoping that we still have the same finance director. But I think that what we have, where we're going, and whether it's $2, $4, $10 a month that affects these people, I'm looking at the 40% of my constituents that are on fixed incomes, that $10 a month can make a difference. You know, you have to look at everybody when you're looking at this budget. You have to look at every single person at every, you know, scale in the economy. So that's where I came from. I haven't voted, I believe, on it in 12 years. I don't plan on voting on it in the other next 12 years if I decide to stay that long. So anyway, I just wanted to bring it up for discussion. So with that, we have a motion and we have a second on the floor. All in favor? And we will move on to item 3, which is the first reading of ordinance 6580 regarding FY 2024 appropriation ordinance. Mr. Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make the 2 changes. Motion to decrease the Journey On funding by $60,000 and move that to the VOA funding line item. As part of my motion, I'd also like to decrease the council contingency by $50,000 and put it into the Child Connections line item. If I can get a second? Second. And that's all I had, Mr. Roberts. I would support moving this forward after those changes are made.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from Mr. Stroman? You've got the floor.
I guess on the removing 50,000 from the council contingency fund, I think that's a little premature. I mean, the mayor just got done talking about how he's given us some autonomy for some things that, unexpected things that are gonna come up, and I would like to have that ability to have that funding in there, and find a different place to find that $50,000. And maybe in the end, that's what we'll do is with that fund is we'll use it for that, what Mr. Lehman is suggesting, but I don't want to make that decision right now. I would not support the motion with its 2 different, the first part of it I would support, but the second part of it I couldn't. If it's going to be combined, then I couldn't support the motion. I yield.
Councilman Lehman, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Stroman, leadership for the past 3 years, there's always been a contingency line item, and the only thing ever purchased with them, to my knowledge, is what we're sitting on right now. No, the chair is behind the dais. Otherwise, the money has always not been spent. Our travel budget's rarely ever spent. We just don't spend a lot of money as a council, so I don't find it inappropriate to move some of that money to something else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Ham, you've got the floor.
And if I'm reading that right, we'll still have $100,000 remaining. Is that right? If we denote 50,000 to this. Is that correct? All right. I'm in favor of.
Anyone else have anything they want to bring up? I knew it was going to be you, Mr. Evans.
That's because I'm curious about process. As we make these changes, this is added into an overall revision, and who's keeping track of this stuff? So they all end up being.
They do.
And we're doing
It goes into the final budget for second reading.
Chunk by chunk, we assemble it. Or can we get together and come with a big proposal and assemble it all at once? Can't do that. Has to be chunk by chunk.
So, Bill, you want history. You should have been here 12 years ago when we used to bring every single department head into this room. They would propose their budget. We as a council would adjust it the way we wanted to. We would add, we would subtract, we would know exactly how much undesignated cash we had, and by the time we were done, there would be zero. So, I mean, it was a madhouse the way we used to do it back then. I think that, I've been here long enough, council contingency, I think 1 year we spent about 50,000 of it. I can't remember ever spending a lot of money out of council contingency. Or maybe it was 20, I don't know. Too many. But I know historically, we have never spent much out of that line item. So, you still have the floor, Mr. Evans. I'm sorry I spoke over you.
I just had the question how we're assembling this chunk by chunk.
Yep.
We're doing
And we could have 4 second readings. I mean, we could keep going on until we're all satisfied with this budget. So, anyway, do you want to speak, Mr. Mayor? Thank you.
Just for perspective's sake, there's no magic number at 150,000. I kind of just put that number together just so you know. It wasn't a specific formula. The other thing is you will have authority throughout the year if something major comes up. And often that might be more than 100 or 150,000 that you would have to supplement the budget anyways. And you have that authority then as well. So I just, I put that in there as kind of to help, but there was, whether it's 100 or 150,000, that's up to you. I mean, it could be 200, it could be 250, who knows? But I did just want to provide it as an option to you. So if you were wondering why we had 150,000, or nothing scientific other than I think it helps you have an item for things like chairs or for travel expense that was more than expected, or just some things of that nature too, or community need. That you all felt strongly about. But you're the council, so really at any time throughout the year, you can make massive $1 million decisions at any time that you would all agree on. So if that helps you out, I don't know if that helps you thinking through it, but I thought I'd present that to you.
Either way, we have to vote on it, right?
Well, either you have to vote on it or somebody has to make a substitute motion. So, did we have a second on that? Sorry, it's been okay. So we had a motion by Councilman Lehman, a second by Councilman Roseland. And if nobody's going to come into the queue, I'll look for a vote on this. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? No. First reading passes with 1 no from Councilman Stroman. Now is the discussion on the future budget meeting dates. Heidi, what do you have set up, and what does this council think about future council dates? I did ask Heidi to put a few days in because we have to have them in there for notification. So, Heidi, would you give me those dates again, please? Of this week?
I propose we push it out, if we can, a week or so. That way we have time to meet in small groups and talk a little bit.
Would anybody be opposed to, and I know this would be kind of pushing it in, but maybe doing a 5 o'clock before the next council meeting on Monday? Oh, it'd be on Tuesday. Oh, I never take time off, so I don't know when there's holidays. So. So that'll only give us an hour and a half, but if we can't get it, then we'll put another budget meeting in after that. So do we have enough time to, yeah, we do. We have enough time to notice that because that's a week or 8 days from today. I know that the Journal changed with their noticing, so I just have to make sure on all this anymore. So, okay, we have a motion. You'll have to tell me who made the motion. Kevin, did you? No, I seconded. You seconded it? Mr. Lehman made the motion. Mr. Mahar made the second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Have a motion to adjourn. And a second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. We weren't here nearly as long as I thought we'd be.